You know what I don't get? How someone could possibly call themselves the ultimate being without having pressed the subscribe button for the New World Review, thus obviously resulting in regular JoJo content being uploaded straight into their YouTube feed. So Kaz really was just that one small step away from godhood, but you guys won't make the same mistake as he did, will you? Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga, and it's JoJo, also known as JoJo Monday. I have no idea why I said that. I've ruined it. I've ruined the video already in record time. Let's just move on. And this time we will be examining the big bad dude of part 2, and undoubtedly one of the most common criticisms that I've encountered regarding battle tendency embodied entirely within Mr. Kaz. Now personally, I'm a pretty huge fan of battle tendency. I think it was a great follow-up to the Slog of Phantom Blood, and it really solidified a lot of the features that make JoJo, well, JoJo, and in a pre-stand era as well. With that said, there are certainly a wide array of flaws within part 2, many of which I have gone through in a separate video, and most of which I can personally shrug off and get past quite easily, but the one thing that really does stick out to me is Kaz and the genuine disappointment of him as a primary antagonist. And there's a huge laundry list of reasons for this, as well as counterpoints for each and every one of them, but some of the more commonly cited ones are vaguity such as bland motivation, minimal character development, and a lackluster overall impact on JoJo. The latter of which is kind of insane because he does literally become the ultimate life form, but at the same time I do completely understand. However, I think that all of these really do speak far more to the core problem with Kaz, which is that we as readers and watchers are mostly unable to form that all-important connection with him as a character, which is very present in, I'm going to say, just about every other primary JoJo antagonist, and let's examine why this is. First up, we will begin with the motivation point, because this really is one of the greatest tools that an author has at their disposal to build a great antagonist. And it doesn't have to be anything so profound. In fact, in my experience, villains often work better with a less than ambitious motivation that causes them to act in grand ways. For an in-universe example, I really can't go past Yoshikage Kira ever. His motivation is that he simply wants to live a quiet life. That is something that most of us can very much empathize with, and combined with his sickening actions, it makes Kira a concerningly intriguing figure to follow. And without going too deeply into part 7 for anyone who hasn't read it, the primary antagonist of Steel Ball Run is driven by the simple yet powerful concept of patriotism, which once again is something that many of us can identify with, whether you're a proud patriot yourself or you're an individual that gets very uncomfortable with blind belief in your nation's self-ascribed superiority. It really doesn't matter which side of the spectrum you fall on, because either way, it gives you an in with the character of Valentine and conjures a very solid feeling towards him, and that's perfect. I think that's exactly what we're after. So here's what I want to do. I want to identify what Kaz's motivation is, because it is the easiest thing in the world to say that he lacks it, but that isn't entirely true. It would probably be more accurate to say that he does possess sound motivation, but it is not one that we as an audience are able to connect with. And in regards to this, we can find a very clear motivation in Kaz's backstory, which occurred something like a ridiculous 102,000 years before the events of Battle Tendency. But let's also continue to give him the credit of brief expansion here, because a lot of people will bring up his flashback as a defense for the character, making it out to be some sort of tragedy that his clan attempted to kill him and forced him on a path of like generic evil, as well as stating that he was only trying to do what was right by allowing his people to live on the surface. And that would be nice. That would be so nice if it were true. But Kaz is specifically stated to be a power-hungry genius who longed for nothing more than just to acquire more and more power, and eventually wished to dominate all of creation. He was not trying to help his people. In fact, it's stated that his people were living in some sort of utopian peace prior to his existence, and his tribe attempted to stop him, not only ruining their peace, but that of all of creation. Kaz did not care for his people. What he cared about was the right to rule over creation, and you know, in many ways, Kaz can be equated to Hitler, which I think is a purposeful and interesting allegory actually, but that is the very clear motivation of Kaz. He wanted more power and as much domination as possible. There's really nothing more to it. It's very standard flat villain stuff and typically weak motivation. So that makes his motivation very boringly, well, domination, or I guess domination over all creation. And this is one of the worst types of motivation that you can ever give a villain, because an audience is almost never able to connect with an idea like this. Other than jokingly, for the most part, regular people don't feel a desire or need for world domination like they do with other basic aspects of life, such as the aforementioned wanting to live a quiet existence or the pursuit of patriotism. Furthermore, as often as it does tend to get used in media, world domination is not a simple idea. You can't just go, me get power, then me rule world. Or I guess you can, but if you do, then you're really deliberately dumbing down an idea that is already difficult to satisfactorily portray, thus making it even less effective overall, which I would say certainly does happen with Cars. So there's nothing really to root for with Cars in terms of motivation. He presents very disconnected existence, and it sadly didn't have to be that way because there was some great potential here. For example, keep the underground existence and lethal sunlight aspect, and then use Cars and the Pillarmen to explore the concept of, say, freedom. You know, the very basic desire to simply go wherever you want in this world. If all Cars wanted was to find a way to live in sunlight on the planet's surface, and all of these horrid actions spawned from that cause, then we would already improve this villain by roughly 1000% because we can all empathize with wanting freedom. And being able to relate to Cars in any way, shape, or form would be magnificent, but sadly, that was not to be. And here we also might hear the argument made that, dude, Cars is not human, so why should he be given human features? And true enough, Cars is not human, but he and the other Pillarmen do already possess innately human qualities about them. So why not go that one little step further and give him a bit of basic human motivation as well? Otherwise, you just have this completely alien existence that is impossible to connect with, and as a result, becomes boring and forgettable. Because in terms of motivation, you can sum Cars up with the following sentence. He is a villain searching for the thing to put in another thing in order to become the super thing. That's great. That sounds nice and compelling. But of course, this is not simply about motivation. A weak motivation can be made up for and balanced out by general character traits. And I think that Dio is a fantastic example of this. Putting aside the stuff we learn about him in part 6 because it's irrelevant to our experience of him in parts 1 and 3, Dio's tenure as an antagonist is quite basic. And I have done a video on Dio expanding on this idea with Araki's original intentions in mind, and my conclusion is that it just didn't hit me in the way that it may have been designed for a wide variety of reasons. Plus, things like the fact that he is quite blatantly stated to be just born evil also contribute to this impression. And even with what we do see in part 6, it neither confirms nor denies that idea, it just throws a big old question mark up. But look, is any of that a problem for Dio? No, not really, because he has this bizarrely charming persona that is capable of pulling off a less than solid motivation. So that results in situations where I can never get on board with what Dio is doing, but I can certainly enjoy him doing it because of his simpler, consistent character traits. Now back to Cars. Can his character traits redeem him? And my first response to that would be, what traits? The most consistent thing regarding Cars is his ruthless nature and obsessive objective-based drive, and that is cool. I guess it is indeed something, but it's nowhere near enough to form a compelling existence within the time he spends on page or screen, which I should also point out is quite minimal until the climax of part 2, which is a big problem. A larger problem though is that just as with the motivation point, Cars had a lot of potential for some great compelling character traits. So for example, on multiple occasions he is actually shown to have some sort of grand respect for life, like when he saved the puppy or when he avoided landing on the flower. That sort of stuff is very intriguing, and it made me think that there was more to Cars than meets the eye, but these situations are very inconsistent with Cars in general. Firstly, because his whole shtick is biological superiority, so why does he care at all for any life other than life on his level? Is it just humans that he demonstrates no regard for? If so, why? Because then it gets even more muddled, as after becoming the ultimate life form, Cars demonstrates zero respect for nature and just willy-nilly kills a squirrel, representing a complete 180 shift in personality, which might have been interesting if we understood what that initial personality was to begin with, and we had something to contrast this new existence against. And not only that, but at a very, very late stage in the game, we're also shown that Cars had some potential for twisted comedy, where he plays Lisa like a guitar, which was funny but strange, because up until now he had always been viewed as this supremely serious being, and it was just so late in the game to start showing any kind of depth. And I guess you could argue that that is just Cars' true nature coming out, which, yeah, sure, why not? Once again though, by this stage it was far too late to salvage him, and more importantly, none of this helps us develop a connection with him. I think the biggest chance we got was the moment where he saved the dog, because people by and large love dogs, and that was a great way to endear a villain to an audience, but in retrospect it just seems like such an isolated incident that counts for so little in the building of his overall character, whatever that turned out to be. There's just very little consistency with character traits beyond the boring, unidentifiable ones being stern, vicious, and primarily quiet. Which now puts us in the position of having a primary antagonist with a dull motivation and a non-cohesive and less than generally compelling character, which, you know, all combines together in that moment where Cars finds the thing, he puts the thing in the other thing, and then he becomes the super thing, which should be a world-shaking event. But instead, it's kind of like, yeah, I guess this dude powered up moment. And you might think that there is nothing Cars can do to make the situation worse for himself, and you'd be right. However, there is great power within other characters to make Cars even less appealing, and it has to do with his juxtaposition to other villains in the series. So as the main antagonist of part 2, Cars is very unfortunately caught in the middle of a Dio sandwich, as Dio serves as the main focus for parts 1 and 3, and so Cars ends up being an underwhelming sort of cheap supermarket brand meat, placed delightfully between two fine slices of brioche. And so anybody who eats that sandwich is going to remember the bread very fondly, but the meat may as well have not existed. But not only that, Kaz is actually outshone in his own part, which partially comes in the form of being represented as a collective. Kaz is one of the Pillarmen, who I actually think work quite brilliantly as a group because there is less of a need to zero in on them individually. However, when everyone is defeated and it leaves Kaz on his own, it leaves us very wanting because he really only worked as part of that collective. But if you do put them in a vacuum and examine them individually, then it's also really hard to deny that Kaz is completely outshone by his servant Wamuu. To me, in an ideal world, Wamuu may have served as a better primary antagonist to Battle Tendency because he just has everything going for him. Being a character who commences a fierce rivalry with our protagonist, as well as being the one who ultimately kills Caesar, which further fuels Joseph. Plus, Wamuu has a simple and great idea of his own to explore, which is honor. What he does is all within the bounds of pursuit of honor, which makes him so much more identifiable than Kaz, because even if we don't necessarily practice it ourselves, there is just something more compelling about a guy who does his best to stand by his own strict code of morality, rather than a guy who is dreaming of dominating or creation. It's just easier to connect with one than the other. So once Wamuu was taken care of, Battle Tendency kind of felt done to me. All that was left to do was Kaz, and I had no connection to him by that point. So from there, things were just plodding along until he too was defeated. So very unfortunately for him, Kaz doesn't even prove to be the most effective villain in his own part, let alone JoJo as a whole. And it doesn't get any better for Kaz going beyond Dio either, because every other part features such a strong antagonist that have developed great admiration and followings within the fanbase. And it's not because we agree with their actions so much, but it's because they possess everything that Kaz does not. But here's the ultimate question. In the end, does any of this matter? I guess one of the problems with examining a topic like this is that it does risk taking Battle Tendency too seriously, when in the end it is very much a quirky, historical, strange tale, not entirely designed to be anything profoundly dramatic or an exploration of incredibly deep ideas. So if you take Battle Tendency for what it is, then I think Kaz is very easy to get past. Mostly because, yeah, you'll just forget about him involuntarily anyway, but I don't know. For me, I think that Kaz was a bit of a shame in a series full of absolutely iconic main antagonists. He's a bit of a stain on what I would consider one of the better JoJo parts because we simply cannot connect with him on any level. And I don't know what else to say. This character is simply a narrative failure. But what do you guys think? Please do let me know down in the comments below, and if you're keen for some more JoJo content, then please do go and check out some of my other videos, or even subscribe to the channel for regular JoJo wonder delivered straight into your YouTube feed. But for now, this has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.